Welcome to the PI Education Webinar. I'm Hal Humphreys, your host. Before we get into the webinar, let's take a moment of gratitude. Today is Veterans Day, and we want to sincerely thank all of those who have served and continue to serve. We honor your service and your sacrifice. Now on to today's guest, someone who's no stranger to the PI community, Brian Willingham, certified fraud examiner and founder of Diligentia Group. He has taught with us, headlined many of our webinars, and written some of Pursuit Magazine's most read articles. Brian leads a highly successful investigative firm based in New York, handling everything from due diligence, asset tracing, executive vetting, to litigation support and complex background investigations. As a matter of fact, I employed Brian this morning to do a little background research for me. His work is rooted in ethical practice, hard work, and grounded in deep research, open sources, public records, and creative insight, creative investigative thinking. In my opinion, Brian is a true champion of our profession. He is a mentor, a colleague, and a trusted friend. He's someone who believes deeply in sharing knowledge, that sharing knowledge strengthens our profession. I agree with him there. It lifts other people up. It demystifies the work. As he puts it, when you share and teach others, you suddenly create an audience, a secret weapon for promoting your business. That spirit of generosity is something we have always valued, and we are thrilled to welcome him back. Brian, good to see you. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us today.
Thanks for having me. I couldn't have written that better myself.
I don't like reading scripts, but sometimes it just keeps us on track. Brian and I go back quite a ways. We met online first, and then Brian, do you want to tell the story of how we met in person for the first time?
Well, you swiped left, and we actually ended up meeting in Madrid in a nice little bodega where we were having some tapas. And I think that was the start of a beautiful friendship around food and drinking way too much sangria.
Yes, no doubt. And Brian and I we've shared time together here in Nashville and other places around the country. And one of the things we always do is try to find the best food. Our topic for today is the work that you do. We want to focus on what it is that you do, Brian. So I'm going to let you kind of lead the way. I'll chime in throughout the hour, but you're steering the ship today, so I'll just let you get started.
It's dangerous giving me the keys to this car. So this is as Hal mentioned, I do a lot of different kinds of work. My work is sort of deeply rooted in online investigations, which varies from case to case and litigation support. But I sit behind my computer and I nerd out trying to find information on people. I do a wide variety of things, including interviews and things along those lines. But sitting behind my computer is one of the things I do. And locating people is one of those tasks that, is sort of rooted in every private investigator. If you are in any type of investigation field, finding people to either talk to them, to serve them, to know where they live, it's sort of one of the things that's rooted in everything. And there's something that brings me sort of great joy in these kind of sort of challenging locates. It's what I like to do is sort of the hard to find people. I think it really makes me challenge and think outside the box and make my brain sort of work on overdrive. I think one of the other things that I really enjoy about it too is it's almost like a mini case where you can get some results relatively quickly. A lot of us work on these big cases that may be going to trial or take years to sort of resolve. But finding somebody is sort of this mini case that you can sort of get the results right out of. So this is sort of one of the reasons why I was particularly interested in talking about this topic. But one of the big things that I see quite frequently is I've seen more cases go south from other investigators, in part because they're relying too much on sort of one database. And I've talked to dozens of colleagues, and Hal and I have talked about this pretty frequently, is that, I get locate reports from attorneys who send over a report from another investigator, which is literally just a copy and paste job from one of the various databases. And, while in some cases that might be helpful, the information is not vetted. It's not, from a really particularly trusted source. And some of the databases are amazing and they provide great information. But it's not vetted in any particular way. And that's sort of something that, I think is worth discussing, about how there's this massive universe of information, not only in these people locate databases, but there's massive amounts of information available elsewhere.
Yeah, I'll chime in real quick and say, you get information from an attorney, and the attorneys that I work with and the attorneys that you work with are really good at doing the attorney business. But I have been sent off on, I don't know, countless wild goose chases with attorneys who in all good faith have come up with a locate and said, hey, go interview this person. And I drive 4 hours to South Texas to knock on a door that is not the person. And a little bit of time up front can save a lot of time in the field.
Yeah. And I think one thing that is worth pointing out too is that a lot of these law firms are getting access to some of these databases too. So they have access to some of the same exact information that we do. So I think it's crucial to not only have, some good, reliable sources, but multiple sources in order to do this. And as I say to everybody, I don't think what we do is anything unearthly, or, we don't have some amazing skill set, but the thing that we do have is that we do this stuff every day, right? So we know the places to go, we know the places to look, and somebody might be able to Google something and find something on Spokio that looks like a current address, but vetting that information is obviously a whole different ball game.
Sure. Talking about the superpowers, we don't have them. I'm just going to bust that myth right there. We don't have superpowers as private investigators. We don't have access to top secret databases. We have access to some databases that have really good information, but there's always a deeper dive. There's always something else required in the process. And, quite honestly, I think, we talked before we started this webinar about, the unfindable person. We've talked a little bit about the investigator mindset, how you kind of approach these things. We're going to talk about some specific tools of the trade. Some of those include databases that we're going to be talking about, but some of those include other sources, ways to vet and verify information. And then Brian's got some real world examples we're going to talk about today. And then, if we get enough time at the end of this, we're going to take questions from the crowd and try and answer those. But Brian, what does unfindable really mean?
Listen, I talk about this a lot with some new investigators that come into the business, but I don't think anybody is unfindable. There is just the amount of time and resources that you're willing to put into it, right? So, not every client has an unlimited budget and an unlimited amount of time in order to do things. So there's ways to effectively find somebody, and I can spend a few hours digging through everything that I can, sitting behind my desk. And then there's times where you have to do other things in order to find somebody. So for example, I put two posts in the public chat here, 2 links to the blog posts that I wrote. One is a series of case studies that I wrote about, and the other is a series of tools that we're going to be talking about today. But one of the stories that I talked about in there was, there was this person that we were trying to find. There was none of the databases had any of the information that, about where this person was living. We knew that they had a PO box, and we didn't have the time to go through the proper channels, to go through the USPS Postal Service and ask them if there was a address behind it. And with the limited amount of time that we have, what we ultimately decided to do was send this giant red tube to the PO box and sit there and wait for somebody to pick it up. So there's all kinds of different avenues of finding people, and there's people that don't want to be found. We talk about a case where there was a homeless person that we ended up tracking down. So listen, there are, the cases that I get and the ones that I'm talking about are not necessarily cases that are, trying to find some sexual predator or somebody's involved in child exploitation or is a fugitive or a missing person or cyber thieves. These are really sophisticated. The FBI can't find some of these people. So I can't imagine that, I'm going to be able to find them. But the ones that I'm talking about is, finding former employees, finding key witnesses in a case, given sort of scant details, Jane, who goes by the nickname, Jane Doe, trying to find her, but limited details, difficult process services. Those are the kinds of things that I think are sort of findable, but, may require some additional vetting and additional kinds of work.
Yeah. Yeah. What are some of the things that make someone seem to be unfindable in your experience?
Yeah, I think, the unfindable is when the databases start showing up and that don't really have any current relevant information. So, we get a bunch of cases where, one, we're giving sort of red herring information. We're giving a wrong name of a person. That's one of the sort of challenges that we face quite a bit. We're given information that is what they believed was accurate was inaccurate. So we're starting with bad information. What makes somebody unfindable would be really scant details. I've gotten so many calls about, a person I met at a bar that has a small tattoo on their wrist, and they might go by the name Jane, and they're about 30 to 35 years old. That's just not enough information in order to find somebody. And, you typically need a couple really solid data points that are sort of a cross section of somebody's sort of history, a family member's name, a city where they lived, a real name, some family members' names, approximate age, identifying details such as their hair color or a tattoo, extraordinarily difficult. And in today's days and times, there is such powerful information now, powerful computer technology coming out that might change at some point. But you need a couple of really solid data points in order to make somebody sort of findable.
Yeah. Yeah. In my experience, the things that make it difficult to find someone, people that have changed their name for some reason. Another thing that is frustrating, although I think it's solvable with access to the databases, is jurisdiction hopping. People that move quite a bit. You don't know exactly where to start looking for them. You've already talked about the minimal footprint business. You got just like very small set of information to work with. Have you ever run across a situation where you seemed like, and I'm asking this question with my own answer in mind.
Mm-hmm.
I do the research. I try to find the person. It seems like they're just really hiding or difficult to find. Turns out they're just a normal person. They're not hiding. They had no idea I was looking for them.
Yeah, no, that happens quite a bit. Sometimes we probably make these things more difficult than they need to be. A lot of people are not that difficult to find. Hal and I were talking before this. Finding somebody like Hal, who is all over social media. I'm going to break some news, but he owns a house in Nashville. I know that he may have a cabin somewhere in the middle of the woods where he is right now. So finding somebody like Hal, who has a professional license, who's all over social media, and revealed it, and that he was in Philadelphia last week. So finding somebody like Hal is not all that difficult, and finding somebody like me is not all that difficult either. In fact, I had an over-anxious fan some years ago who tracked me down into the city that I lived and was wandering around my small little town looking for me. So one of the things
Sorry about that, Brian. I just really wanted to meet you face to
face. One of the things I'm actually going to put up there for people to see is this site called Delete Me, which I found after this little incident. So this person, my office address is not very findable. intentionally do that because I've had some over anxious fans try to pop in on me a couple of times. Delete Me is this source where, as you know, if you type in anybody's name, there's a whole slew of information from Spokio and Intellius and that shows your address, phone numbers, and all those kinds of things. And there's all these assessor-related databases that reveal your address information, phone numbers, all personal details about yourself. I wound up using this service called Join Delete Me, or Delete Me, I think it's called. The website is joindeleteme.com, which helps to remove a bunch of that stuff from the internet about your sort of personal details. So, those people can be more challenging to find as well, too. Finding me might be a little bit more challenging for somebody that's just Googling.
Yeah.
Here goes the train. But now I think it might be a good...
That's a data point that we can use in locating you as well.
That's true. The timestamp might be able to tell exactly the location I am. Now might be a good time to chat about some of the tools. What do you think, Hal?
Yeah, before we do that, I want to talk about the mindset because I think, we've kind of touched on this, but I want to kind of highlight the mindset business. Somebody asked me in a conference a couple of weeks ago in North Carolina, what does it take to be a good investigator? And my answer from the stage was, the main thing it takes to be a good investigator is you've got to be a curious pain in the ass.
Yeah. I like that.
Yeah, I think that kind of like it's a bit of a crass way to dial it in, but you've got to be really curious. But there's what is your take on the mindset to be a good investigator?
Yeah, I think so one of the things that I think that I'm really good at, and I can only speak from personal experience. Curious is obviously a very natural one. One of the things that I think is extraordinarily helpful and is a skill set that I don't think is something that I flaunt to everybody, but I'm very good at a lot of things, but not necessarily a master of one thing. And what I mean by that is that, as an investigator, anytime I get a case or a locate or whatever the matter may be, my brain is going about getting there into, knowing how the world works, knowing what data is available, knowing the different avenues that I can conduct investigations and how to get the answers to those questions. So my mind is going in all these different directions about the best ways to go about doing it. And understanding the things that I don't know too. I'm not a surveillance guy. I'm not into computer forensics. I don't do bug sweeping. So understanding what all the tools that are available to me and choosing the best path for somebody to go down. So I think to me, that is sort of a very helpful tool that not many people consider a tool as being like, if I was really good at one thing, that might be the only thing that I would do, or I'd go straight to that thing and might be unsuccessful. But having all these other tools at my disposal or other resources, I know how to go, who to go to for those resources. I think that is an incredibly undervalued resource.
Yeah, and I think that falls in the category of the guy that comes on the ship with a hammer and taps in one spot and solves the problem and hands them a really big bill. They're like, you only spent 5 minutes. He's like, I spent 30 years learning where to tap the hammer. A part of what a good investigator brings to the table is knowing where the efficiencies are likely to be in the searching process. And this brings us right to the next topic, which is tools of the trade and what most investigators miss. Talk to us about databases, Brian.
Yeah, I'm going to do that. I'm going to try to share my screen here. Of course, we tried this a couple times, but here we go.
There we go.
Everybody can see my screen. So I've created a presentation that I did for the Minnesota Association of Private Investigators a couple of weeks ago. And I think one of the things that people love to talk about are tools. And I see some of the questions on here about what is the best database to use. And we're going to get into some of those questions there. So I think anytime you're talking about locating people, the first place that I'm going, I would probably always go to Google first. I'm kind of assessing what the landscape is. So if I'm trying to find, I'm going to use Hal as an example in many of these things, or Brian Willingham. But I'm trying to see what their sort of public profile is. If they're out there, they're not out there. Do they have profiles all over, social media profiles, which would get a better understanding of where they are. But one of the first places I'm going is these people finding databases. I got a misspelling in there. I've heard a lot of investigators use Truthfinder, Spokeo, Been Verified, and Intellius. Those are some of what I call sort of the consumer level databases. And the reality is that most of them are pretty good. I've done extensive amount of research on this. I've tested them against the professional grade investigative databases. And the reality is that about 60, 70% of the time, the information is relatively good. 60% or 70% of the time is relatively good is not sort of the hit rate that I want to be able to give to my client. But if that's something that you wanted to use as one of your resources, by all means, go for it. I've listed out a couple of the main databases, the four that I have access to: IDI, DelPoint, IRB Search, Tracers, and TLO. So those are sort of the main databases that I think most investigators are using. People always ask me if you were to go to pick one. IDI is my number one resource right now. I've done quite a bit of testing on this in terms of phone number data, up-to-date address information, and I don't think none of the other databases are competing with it, as far as I'm concerned. Your traction may vary depending on the types of research that you're doing, but IDI has been my go-to. I will never, ever use just one. And I think that's just a sort of critical point that you're going to be hearing from me a lot through the rest of this presentation. I will run 3, 4, and even 5 sometimes on people. The order that I have them in there, IDI, DelPoint, DelPoint and IRB Search are nearly identical. You don't need access to both of them. I've spoken to representatives of DelPoint and IRB Search. I think DelPoint, from what I've been told, is probably a little bit better. And Tracers would probably be my third option. TLO is a little bit of a sore point with me. I've actually been kicked off TLO for reasons that I do not know because they won't tell me. And I posted something on LinkedIn about 6 months ago. And it turns out that dozens of other investigators have been kicked off TLO. So getting back to the point of relying on one database, TLO seems to be purging a lot of investigators. Not sure what's going on there, especially the smaller investigators. So certainly something to be aware of. And the fact that I was not able to ever get an answer as to why I was off of TLO, sort of interesting.
Yeah, and we talked about this before, but like for the folks in the room that are not licensed private investigators or that are just getting started, these databases are subscription databases. They're places where you have to show your credentials to get access. I was removed from TLO's database a couple of years ago because I didn't have the appropriate office situation with a locking file cabinet and a paper shredder. And as Brian and I were talking, a lot of my work is done out in the field where I need to have access to the databases immediately in the car. And I rarely print paper personally. So, that seems like a silly compliance thing. But all of the databases have some compliance issues that we have to deal with as private investigators. It's just a thing that we have to deal with.
Yep. So a couple of questions I see coming in are, why are some of these addresses that show up on people's databases sort of red herrings? It's an interesting question. I think a lot of times there's mix-ups between various people. They come from credit header sources. They come from various sources. Quite often what for all of these databases, they will list an address and they will list the time period, approximate time period in which a person has been affiliated with that address. Those time periods are usually very far off. What I typically will do, there's typically addresses in there that will be sort of a red herring that show up for one day or 1 month. Typically, those are kinds of addresses that I would typically ignore, especially if it's in a jurisdiction that is 18 counties away or in a different state. It usually doesn't mean anything, but it also can be a lead that does mean something. So something worth thinking about.
Yeah, and I'll jump in real quick and say, Jeremy, one of the things that happens is if you've ever gone out to do research, or you're at your desk and you're doing research and you type in a name or you type in an address or you type in a bit of data and you misspell it or you have it in wrong, you're going to find information for that one thing and it may be the wrong thing. But the databases are basically it's an aggregation of a bunch of different data sources, and if there's a random piece of information that's tied to a name that is spelled similar to the one you're looking for or whatever, it may show up in the database, so you may get red herrings along the way.
So I'll give TLO credit for one thing that none of the other databases do, and TLO is really good. They have sort of an advanced search capabilities where you can add very distinct information about a person. So for example, I can enter the name Hal, I can enter his wife's name and a city that I know that he was associated with. And as far as I'm concerned, as far as I'm aware of, none of the other databases do that. So that can be really, really valuable. Some of the other databases have some really sort of interesting features where you can search a certain radius around a city. So if you're looking for a witness who might have been in a town, you can search a radius of a city. So one of the things about these professional grade databases, what they offer as opposed to sort of the commercial grade databases, is they give you sort of unique capabilities of searching. If you know partial details about someone, you know the month they were born and the approximate year or the approximate age. So those are some of the advanced features that some of these offer.
You mentioned you never ever just run one database search. Yeah. Why is that?
I'm untrustworthy of anything. You know, I listen, I don't, as an investigator who deals with a lot of demanding clients, relying on one source of information, it's just like anything. Relying on news for one source of information, relying on anything, one piece of information, is just wrong.
Yeah.
You know, yes. You need, you know,
if you get the same detail from 3 different databases, you can kind of start to think, oh, that's a legitimate detail.
Yeah, I mean, listen, you're trying to put a web of information that there's no piece of information that I can say to any client that, hey, this is the address that they live. The only way to do that is to go knock on their door and actually show that they actually live there. But if I can show that they own the property, they have a driver's license at that address, they own a vehicle that registered to that address, and they vote there. Those are 4 distinct pieces of data that not only the database is telling me that they live there, but they're 4 distinct pieces of data that show that they live there.
Yeah. All right. So you've got some interesting things up on the screen there. Talk to us about OSINT and how to leverage that.
Yeah, so breach data has become this amazing piece of information that, you know, as everybody knows, breach data has been, databases have been hacked for the last 15 years, and some resourceful people have started putting together this information into these various databases. And one of the examples that I provide in one of the difficult locates that I was trying to find is that I ended up tracking this person down because of something that I found in breach data. So the Park Mobile, which is an app that people have on their phone where they can park, and it's usually in various cities, but they had a breach of their data. And I was trying to locate this person and ultimately was able to find breach data in the Park Mobile app, which showed a driver's license, not a driver's license number, a license plate number of a vehicle that I was not aware of that he had because it wasn't registered in his name. And by doing that, I was able to track this person down. So I provided a couple of interesting resources, and there's million different ways why breach data can be extraordinarily powerful. There's, Ashley Madison, an adult friend finder. There's, you can find social media profiles. You can find addresses and emails and phone numbers that may be associated with them. It's really become an incredible source. But I've put a couple up there. Dhashed and Snutspace would be sort of the commercially available ones that are relatively good. You can get usernames, passwords, various things that could lead you into different directions and great sort of pivot points. The one that I've used regularly now, which is a very expensive database, is DarkSide District 4. I've talked to a lot of people, and I think DarkSide is probably one of the best ones out there. It's super expensive. It's more than $10,000 a year. But if you're doing this work sort of regularly, it's certainly worth taking a look into.
Are there ethical issues with using breach data?
It's really interesting. Ethics is something that, Hal and I talk about a lot. I've written about a lot. I've come around probably over the last 5 or 10 years about this topic. Steve Mason, one of our good friends, we've had some lively discussions about it. I think at the end of the day, I think it's really a matter of how you frame it in your own mind. The reality is the information is readily available out there. It's in the people that, for example, DarkSide, they're not paying for hacked data. They're just accessing the information on the dark web and putting it into a usable format so that other people can view it. I've been able to wrap my head around it as something that I feel like can be appropriate. And frankly, it can provide leads for other things. It's not something you can specifically rely on and go into court and hand in information about something that you found on the DarkSide database. But I've gotten my head around it.
Okay. I mean, I think it falls to the category of if you've got there's another data point for Brian, and we can locate him. We've got 2 train whistles going by and timestamps on those. If you've got a car out in the middle of a field or on the side of the road that has been abandoned, it's there. Anyone can walk up to it and look inside of it and see what's there. So I've heard arguments on both sides of the ethics of using breach data. If you're going to be using the information in court, be very, very careful of how you use that. But if you're using it in research to locate someone, very useful tool. And the information is there.
And one of the reasons why I'm really keen on DarkSide is because these are investigators that created this database. They will testify in the court as to where they obtain the information. So if it ever does, I'm not an expert in the dark web. I can find my way onto the dark web, but I'm not finding breach data. And if there was ever a reason where it did become some critical piece of information, reaching out to them and saying, hey, this is what I've got. How can we verify the authenticity of it? They would be there for you.
Are there any resources aside from the 3 you just showed? Is there a good place to go for a list of kind of open source tools out there for investigators?
There's millions. There's a lot of really nerdy ones. I can put something together afterwards. I put a lot of resources on my own website. It's certainly something you can check out.
Okay.
I don't have a specific set of resources.
Okay. You got vehicle sightings databases up there.
I love this. This is one of those things that has really come in handy. And I think one of the things about vehicles is that, especially when you're dealing with a certain type of individual, I think there's 2 things that people will never lose is their phone and their vehicle. Those are sort of the lifeblood of anybody. So if you're trying to track somebody down, finding their vehicle is probably a good sense of where they are. The vehicle sighting databases are amazing with being able to, for those of you who don't know, there is a series of vehicles. I got another misspelling in there. There's a series of vehicles that drive around taking pictures of various license plates. They're usually tow trucks. They're usually in sort of more city-based areas, and they work really well in places like Florida and Arizona and California, especially where communities where they're sort of cookie cutter communities, but they drive around looking for vehicles to potentially repossess. And you can buy this information from various sources. So DRN is the major database provider that does this. You can access this information through DRN, through TLO, IRB, and DelPoint. And I put up a couple of screenshots here, which I'm going to share here, where if you put in a license plate, it will show you the locations and timestamps as to exact date and place as to when they have seen a vehicle. And some of the nice little features that it has, and you can see some of these features that are coming soon. So my understanding is DRN is the direct data source provider. I know some investigators have access directly with DRN. My understanding is that they're no longer giving investigators access directly, in part because of their relationship now with TLO and some of the other database providers. But DRN gives you some more advanced features. And one of those advanced features is searching by an address. So if you were investigating an address and wanted to determine who was living there, it can do like a little radius circumference around the house, and you can pinpoint all the vehicles that have showed up there within a period of time. So that's something that could be very helpful. So here you would just enter the license plate number or the VIN number, and it will give you the data. And one of the nice things too is if you've got somebody that is really difficult to locate, they have a monitoring tool, and where you can put in a person's license plate and it will send you an email as soon as somebody pops up there. And to show you what this looks like, this is actually my vehicle. So I was curious as to whether my vehicle would show up, and it did. And interestingly, this was on the Whitestone Expressway. For those of you not from around New York, this is a bridge that goes from the Bronx over into Queens. And apparently there was some sort of license plate reading vehicle probably in the median that was taking pictures of cars going by, and it caught my vehicle going through. So for people like me who live in more rural areas, I park my car in a garage. I live in much more of a rural area. It's going to be much more difficult to track down. The places that I've seen that this works amazingly are people that live in Arizona is an amazing place for this kind of stuff, and Florida. And California. Those are three particular areas that are really helpful. If you live in New York City, obviously having a vehicle parked on the side of the road is not all that common, so you don't get as many hits. And it's also a certain type of individual that would be parking outside or parking right outside of their house. So it's one of those fascinating tools that has helped me on a couple of cases of nailing down where somebody is. And as everybody knows that probably has done some of this research, the databases can be a little bit slow to react. So if somebody moves, there's a chance that it may not show up in the databases for some period of time. And one of the examples that I had provided in the case studies that I showed was this person that had moved multiple times. They tried serving her on multiple occasions. We tracked down her vehicle, and she had moved into a new community, which none of the databases had, and we were able to track her down that way.
I'm going to jump in real quick. If you're out there thinking, oh my gosh, I had no idea they were gathering data plates from cars. Not only are they using LPRs, license plate readers, on tow trucks and those kind of things. If you're in a gated community, a lot of times there will be an LPR on the gate post there, apartment complexes, shopping malls. If you park your car at the airport, there's probably going to be a license plate reader there. So this is really useful information. Go ahead. Sorry, I cut you off.
No, that was great. I think parking lots are a great place. They'll go driving through a Home Depot, and that can be a really great source of information. Social media research, I think people always get a little, they think that there's some secret behind social media research, but here's a couple of tools there's a million tools. And with all of this stuff that I'm talking about, I'm only going over certain tools that I think are the most helpful. So social media research, there's a couple of databases that I will use every single time. One is whatsmyname.app, which is an amazing source. So Hal Humphreys has a certain username that he probably uses on most of his social media apps. I will plug his name into What's My Name, and it will scour 700 something social media databases and give you the result of whether or not there is a social media profile existing on that particular platform. So people are a creature of habit. They use the same platform, same social media handle on most accounts. And once you get that, it could be an amazing source of information. So that's one of my sort of go-to resources. OSIN Industries is a new kid on the block. There's also a sister site. It's not a sister site, a similar site called epios.com, EPIOES, I believe. But what OSIN Industries does is something similar where you can type in a person's phone number, email address, or username, and it can find social media accounts that are associated with those accounts. So it's really an amazing tool to be able to pinpoint certain accounts that are associated with a particular person. And the nice thing about those kinds of accounts is because a phone number or an email address is like today's day and age is like a social security number. So most people hang on to these things and keep them, but you know there's a direct one-to-one correlation with that account, and it may lead to certain pivot points. So if you find a social media account tied to an email that is known to a person, and then you find a username that is a unique username, then you can use that username to sort of pivot off of and find sort of other social media profiles. Nice. And Scope Now is a service that I will use on most background investigations that I do, and in sophisticated sort of locate tools. But Scope Now is very similar in terms of you can type in a person's name, address, phone numbers, email addresses, usernames, and so on and so forth. It'll print you out a beautiful report using some very sophisticated tools in the back end. To be able to print out a report of various social media profiles that may or may not be associated with a particular person. And the nice thing about it is it produces a really nice, easily readable report. I consider it running like a comprehensive report on an individual in one of the regular databases, and certainly a tool that I would use on quite a bit of people. And Shadow Dragon is the last tool. The tools that I provide are usually go from free and sort of inexpensive to super expensive, and Shadow Dragon falls into the super expensive category. It costs thousands of dollars. It's used by a lot of the 3-letter agencies. It's a sophisticated tool for tracking down social media profiles, and it does a whole lot of other things as well.
Okay. Well, Brian, I want to take a real quick break if we can. I know Stephanie has a coupon code that she wants to provide to our viewers. Stephanie, if you want to take the time to pop that up. If you need to get some continuing education, you can go over to pieducation.com and use this coupon code and get 10% off of any course you'd like to take. Stephanie, thank you so much for sharing that with us. I'll leave it up there on the screen for just another couple of seconds. 3, 2, 1. There we go. Okay, Brian, we've talked about some pretty amazing tools regarding OSINT, open source intelligence. You've got a couple more up here. Talk to me about these other sources.
Yeah, so this is we talked about sort of ethical issues. These are sort of ones that sort of gets into a hairy gray area. And it's certainly something that you've got to talk about the legal implications and ethical considerations surrounding this. PIMIs and FaceCheck ID are two sources that you can plug in anybody's photo or plug in a photo, and it can return results that they have found throughout their various internet research. So what the case that I referenced in the case study, we had tracked down this particular person who was the only person who worked at this apartment facility that had the information that the client was looking for. And we found a really good photo of him, but we couldn't figure out what his actual name was. And by running it through some of these facial recognition software, we were able to track down a photo of a wedding blog in which he was named. It had his husband on there, and we were able to track him down that way. There's certainly some implications here. It is not perfect, and there's certainly some things that you should really consider in terms of ethical implications here, but it does exist.
Yeah, good. Now we're moving on to more of publicly available databases. Go ahead.
So DMV data, I think, is one of these underutilized resources. We talked earlier before about having various data points that point to where somebody is living. And I'm not just relying on IDI or TLO or IRB telling me that this top address is the person where somebody lives. One of the things that I love to do is to, having permissible purposes, of course, you have to follow DPPA rules. Having permissible purposes, you can pull a driver's license number, you can get motor vehicle registration records. Some of the investigative databases have some information on some of the on various states. Some states are much more willing to provide the information than others, like Florida, for example, as everybody knows, is the Sunshine State, and they seem to sell all their data willy-nilly. But other states are not, including California, which is really challenging. In fact, it's very difficult to get an address off of DMV in California unless you're an attorney. But DENS-free is a service that I use frequently. You can get vehicle registration information and driver's license information. Logan registration is another service that I know other people use from all 50 states. So you can get all 50 states. Some states require certain permissions. You need to have authorization. Other states, you just need to have the proper permissible purpose in order to obtain that information. But again, this is trying to find information that is authenticating where somebody may or may not be.
Okay.
And, I think one of the things that gets overlooked a lot, and, I had a case just the other day, another investigator reached out to me and said, hey, I found a couple of references to a DWI and a police blotter on a newspaper. I'm wondering if you can help me pull these records. So I went to the county website where this person lived, and it turns out that he had not only 2 DWIs, but he had a restraining order on him, and he had another DWI on him. I guess this investigator never wound up going to the county level website where this person lived and looking this information up, which was sort of readily available out there. So, I think these are sort of sources that get underutilized. And this was not in a state that I lived. This was in Illinois and many states over, which I'm not, terribly familiar with how the court systems work. But I do know that most states provide this information on their website and it's readily available. So local county courts can always be an amazing source of potential information. Somebody could have got a traffic ticket recently where you might be able to get a driver's license number. Somebody could have been arrested recently. Somebody could be in jail. So you might want to check local inmate records. So there's always just an amazing resource of information that is readily available. PACER, as everybody knows, is federal level courts. And Judy Records is the website that I rant and rave about to everybody. It is totally free. It covers some nerdy person was able to sort of access information from hundreds upon hundreds of counties across the United States. The database information that is in these local county courts and put them into this one giant database for everybody to search. I have found some amazing information. And what the great thing about it is you can find information in jurisdictions that you may or may not, the person may not have been in. So one of the keys when I'm doing research on somebody is knowing which counties that they've lived in, because I want to make sure that I search those counties. But the reality is somebody could have been arrested in a county 2 counties over, and I may have missed it. So places like Judy Records, LexisNexis, Bloomberg Law, Westlaw. They cover a wide array of states and county court records. So you might be able to come up with certain pieces of information that might be helpful, where somebody might be living. They might have filed a pro se lawsuit where they list their address, which is one of the case studies that I referenced. So litigation can be a really valuable tool as well.
Yeah, and I want to hop in real quick. So, like I said in the beginning, I asked Brian to do a little research for me this morning on a contractor that I'm having some issues with. And the second I got the information that Brian provided to me, I went straight onto the Davidson County Court database and found not only the criminal things that were mentioned in the comprehensive report, but also other criminal infractions. And in Davidson County, Tennessee, you can click on a link to find court documents, and there's the arresting officer's affidavit right there, public record, available for you to have a copy of. So if you're an investigator and you're using the databases, that's a great place to start, but you need to dig a little bit deeper and go to that county level. That's really, really good advice.
And to Hal's point, I helped him. We ran 2 comprehensive databases. One of the databases had a slew of criminal records. Hal found many more on the local county court website. The other database had 0 criminal records. So it's all about what these databases have in their, silo of information. You don't always know what's in there, but it's certainly not 100% reliable source. It's a good starting point, and it will lead you to somewhere, but it's not always the end point.
Yeah. So we are 50 minutes into this webinar, and it seems like anytime Brian and I get to talking together, I feel like we could just do it for hours and hours and not miss a beat. But I know that we've got a time limit here. Let's we had in our kind of show sheet to talk about some case studies. I'm going to suggest we skip those specifically and tell people, hey, the case studies are referenced in the blog post that Brian has posted in the chat there. And if you want to go read more from Brian, you can go to diligentiagroup.com and find his entire blog roll there. You can also check out pursuitmag.com for some articles from Brian. Let's talk about, in wrapping this up, how do you know when you've hit a wall in your investigative research?
Hal, I've never hit a wall. I always have sort of, as we talked about earlier, I always have I'm sort of framing out the information that I've been handed and the best sort of approach and how to go about it. My walls are usually by how much time and resources my client is willing to put into something. So I'm always trying to get to the point of getting answers for them in the quickest way possible. And I think the quickest way possible is using some of these databases, having a keen understanding of the next places to go in terms of where information may be available to me. There's always 1,000 ideas that I could have. But it's usually limited by how much somebody is willing to go after it. One of the cases that I've referenced in the case study, and I'll just briefly talk about this, is a woman asked me to find somebody who had an extraordinarily common name that she had met in the 1980s. And I was very keen on telling her how challenging it was going to be. And, I did my best with the databases. We wound up calling 50 people who we thought might be the guy. We knew he was in the military. We called him and asked him a question. Did you serve in the military in, Virginia in the 1980s? We got 50 no's. And then we wound up sending 50 FOIL requests to verify the authenticity of whether or not this person was in the military. And on the 50th response, we got back a result that said that he's the guy. And we wound up calling the guy, who was somebody that we had spoken to previously. I said, hey, did you serve in the military? And did you know this person? And they were like, yeah. And well, we called you a couple months ago and you told us no. He's like, yeah, I didn't know what it was about. I thought you were just a scam caller. So listen, there's always dead ends. There's always a limit to what we can do. But you never know until you give it a shot.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, and I think it's very important to point out that the walls are usually created by time and money. When we talk about resources, we're primarily talking about money here. You know, someone's got a budget, they want you to do things. What I find, and I think Brian, you'll say you do the same thing. If you got a particularly tough one and you've reached the end of the resources, sometimes you just get your ego involved and you want to find the person. And I do a good bit of unbilled work looking for people. The question is, how do you decide, all right, I've got to stop and say we're not going to do any good?
It's a really good question. Yeah, I do the same. And listen, I will go over budget and put it on my own dime because it's your own challenge, right? You know, you're challenging yourself. You're trying to make yourself a better investigator. You want to provide as much as you possibly can for a client. I'm a capitalist also. I have a family. I'm not going to spend my days and hours not making some money. So I will always, you know, I'm very upfront with clients about my capabilities, what I can do, what I can't do. But ultimately, sometimes you just got to throw in the towel.
Yeah, let's talk about real quick. We got about 5 minutes left. Now, I do, you know, you and I could spend hours upon hours talking about ethics and the boundaries when we're dealing with ethics. But let's talk about, you know, what are some of the ethical boundaries that we deal with when we're skip tracing, trying to locate someone that needs to be located?
Yeah. So I think one of the biggest ones that I can think of is getting a call from some random person off the internet and saying, "Hey, I need to find this person." Oh yeah. Why do you need to find this person? So you don't always know the story behind why somebody is trying to find something. I've made a choice over the years not to work with people who are randomly calling me off the internet. I will not work with anybody who will not tell me the ultimate reason why they're doing something. And if I smell any whiff of potentially unethical behavior, it's just not a case that I'll take. I don't care if it's an attorney, whether they're trying to find somebody, why they're trying to find somebody. You know, I think you just have to follow your gut sometimes when it comes to some things like this. You certainly have to be a lot more suspicious when somebody from a Proton email is calling you from a burner number and is trying to find Jane. You know, your yellow and red flag should be going up pretty quickly. And you know, it's for me. It's just not worth the potential risks there of, you know, whether there's a restraining order, whether there's some, you know, other nefarious reason why they're trying to get in touch with them. So I'm typically working with attorneys, law firms, and trying to stay away from sort of the general public.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. If you're a professional investigator out there doing the work and you get a call from an unrepresented citizen out there trying to find, I don't know, their old high school girlfriend or something like that, be very, very, very careful doing that kind of research and turning over information. There's some actual case law where investigators have been held criminally liable for the actions of a stalker or someone that did something horrible to a person they located. So it's good advice to always work with an attorney if you're a private investigator doing this kind of work. At least you've got some kind of protection there. But I will tell you, I had an attorney call me about 6 months ago on a case, and he said, "You're working for me, but I want you to talk to my client." And his client literally said, "I want to find this information because I want to blackmail this guy." And I'm like, I'm not down with that.
Yeah, that happens quite a bit. But like you said, most of the time, even if somebody says, "Oh, I do have an attorney," I'm like, "All right, put me in touch with your attorney, and we'll set up the engagement letter to them." And most of the time, you don't hear back from them.
Okay, we got a question from the crowd here, and we're down to literally 2 minutes left. Brian and Hal, do you charge your client for any fees from database investigative tools you use? Brian, how do you deal with that?
I do every single one. So I think investigators handle this all differently. I am a fan of charging every database fee to them. I typically will work on some flat fee arrangements for certain types of locates. So, you know, I'll have different levels of a locate, but absolutely, I need to sort of make my money back. I don't upcharge any of my databases. I know a lot of firms will double and triple costs of their database, like a TLO report for 14, they'll charge them $50. I don't do that. It's a cost of doing business for me, but I will absolutely charge whatever fee that is to my client.
And then the last thing I want to talk about, upcharging TLO is a great way to lead into this conversation. Brian, how do you feel when investigators will do an IDI search, put their own label on it, and turn it over to their client, charge them $250 and say, this is a deep dive background investigation?
I think in one word, I think it's a travesty. I really do. I mean, I think it doesn't make the industry better. I think, an attorney can smell it from a mile away when they know that you're white labeling something and handing something over. For one, it's not anything that is considered comprehensive. That is not a background check. Anybody can call that a background check. It is not. There's just a wide variety of information that is not in a comprehensive report that is just completely missing. It doesn't give any context. It doesn't give any analysis. You are providing zero service to your client. And that's my opinion. And there are people that have made plenty of money doing that. It's certainly somebody's going to sniff it out at some point, and it's not going to last forever.
And I would say, lastly, along those lines, there's not a single attorney or attorney's office with which I work today that does not have access to these exact same databases. Every single one of them has the ability to run an IDI, TLO, tracers, those kind of things. Brian, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to be with us for an hour. It is top of the hour. It's noon here in Nashville, Tennessee. I'm guessing 1 o'clock where you are. Thank you so much for doing this with us.
Thanks for having me, Hal. It's good seeing your face.
And for those that dropped into the room today, thank you for being here with us. And for our veterans in the room, we are thinking about you on Veterans Day today. Thank you so much for your service.